If people can write where you're from and where you're located, that would be good. Instead of sitting silent, that would be exciting. And whoever sees the chat, please tell us where people are coming from. That would be cool. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. This is like the first 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, 10 participants. Hey, here's the chat. I'm in Canada. Or you guys, please write where you are. Nice. Here's another Canadian. Thank you. Yeah. Awesome. That's Cardiff. Yeah. Belgium, Arizona, all over the place. This is awesome. New Jersey. Sweet. Cool stuff. Are you guys general practice, ER, or you are? I'm in urgent care. Where are you guys? General practice, awesome.
I mean, Ivan, you're leading the show. Carry on. I'm supposed to introduce you. I think you're going to do it yourself.
Well, we're otherwise sitting just silent, so it's a little boring. I've done 1 or 2 of these, so.
I know. I can do that.
Cool, I'll shut up. Fine.
Carry on.
All right. Large and small animal. That's awesome. Manitoba. Is it cold in Manitoba already? Should be a -0. I'm in New Brunswick, so New Brunswick is still fall. Manitoba gets cold very, very early.
Are you one of these people that cannot handle silence, Ivan?
Yeah. Or to be more simple, can't shut up.
All right. So let's start. So, well, morning, afternoon, evening, I don't know where you are, but it looks like you're coming from lots of different places. So welcome to today's webinar. So the topic today is how tech can help veterinary practice fight stress and burnout. So we have an exciting session ahead. As you can see, Ivan is in a good form today. So I'm your host. I'm Julien Renard. I'm a vet, and I'm one of the founders of Vetstoria. Now, I'm thrilled to introduce you to our 2 speakers today. We have first, I'm sorry, Mary, I'm going to start with Dr. Ivan, if that's all right. With Dr. Ivan Zak. I will call him Ivan because I know him for a long time, so I will struggle to call him doctor. But he's a true multi-talent. I do apologize for the pretty long CV here. I had to put a few bullet points not to forget what I have to mention. But yeah, it's a very long list of achievements. So he's a vet, an entrepreneur, and a passionate advocate for the well-being of veterinary professionals. So actually, Ivan and I have taken similar path, well, at least early stage, but then I kind of gave up. He was doing too many things. So he began his career as a vet working in emergency practice. I think you stayed there for around 12 years, Ivan.
Yep.
And then, correct, 12 years?
Yep.
Yeah, probably the same. I did around the same. And then he ventured into the tech world, where he founded and sold a successful tech company called SmartFlow. Amazing tech business. It looked like it was not enough for him, so he kind of returned to school, and he graduated from Stanford School of Business in executive leadership and innovation. And then he did an MBA, not done yet. He did an MBA in international healthcare management, and his dissertation was on lean in methodology and burnout prevention. So he knows the topic very well, and he has a great passion for it. So More recently, Ivan founded Galaxy Vet. It's an employee-owned veterinary healthcare business that has well-being and burnout prevention as a strategic priority. Ivan, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction.
Mary, our second speaker today. So Mary Schwartz has dedicated a pretty impressive 10 years to the veterinary profession. She started as a veterinary technician and ended up a career in a practice working as a practice manager. She had the pleasure, not sure it was always the pleasure, but to experience COVID challenges working in a practice, and because she was a practice manager at that time, and she was doing that just before joining Pet Desk as a manager of sales enablement. So I guess with hands-on experience and dedication to animal care, she will have, and she has, a very unique perspective on the topic. So that was the introduction. Mary, thank you and welcome. Before we dive into discussion, let's outline the plan for today. So when I reached out to Ivan a couple of months ago, asking him if he was interested to discuss the burnout topic with us, Ivan gently and nicely offered to do a presentation he was actually going to deliver end of September at the World Small Animal Veterinary Association Congress. I believe it was a couple of weeks ago in Portugal. So I thought, brilliant, thanks a lot. Great idea, and hopefully great content. And I looked at the presentation, it was great content. So the presentation of Ivan will be the core of the webinar. And Mary will provide a perspective on working as a vet tech for decades, and now offering, I guess, very valuable insight on the impact of technology for veterinary practices. Question, please feel free to add this in the chat. I believe there's a Q&A button somewhere. So please add your question there. We will go through this question at the end of the session. Ivan? Hello? Can you hear me? Ooh.
Thank you for that introduction, Mary. Pleasure. Presentation today is good. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes,
My
we
internet
can.
just was not stable for a second.
Yes, that's correct. Now we can hear you.
Okay. All right. Well, that was the worst moment where the internet should be frozen. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is the talk that I delivered last week or 2 weeks ago at the World Small Animal Association Congress. It was interesting. It was a lot of fun. There's some practical stuff at the end. So for those that will be falling asleep along the way, just zoom through the last portion. There will be a link to something that you can actually do in your practice just to measure how burned out the team is based on the methodology that we're looking into it. And we'll try to make a sort of an association of the technology, how it can solve certain burnout triggers. But so I'll start just with basically how and why we join our profession. And it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody why we joined this industry. And, you know, everybody who you talk to or you tell people that you work in the vet clinic, a lot of people immediately say, well, I wanted to be a vet when I was 10 years old or 5 years old, whatever it is. For some reason, it's a dream of every child to be a veterinarian, maybe because it's playing with puppies and kittens. And I see it in my daughter now. She's 3. She comes into, I actually do ER shifts now, which is exciting for her because she can come into the vet clinic and then I do rounds with her. She comes in and I have to tell her what puppies are sick with. So those are all cool things. And that's a picture with me and my son. Also working in the vet clinic, and it's cool because your parents so your kids can actually tell their friends who their parents are. I was excited about that. I'm not an engineer, and then a 3-year-old have no idea what you do, but when you're a vet, they know. So, and you're very proud when they're, want to be a vet for the Halloween. So that was Halloween, about probably 8 years ago or 9 years ago. So that's super cute. You can deliver puppies on a C-section overnight. Most annoying cases for those that you guys worked in ER, it's usually the breeder calling until 5 a.m. and don't want to bring the dog until it's 5 a.m. They come in for C-section. But, those moments where you're reviving the puppies and just in general, the whole love for animals. And I used to have a dyed stupid hair when I had hair. And then you can tell cool stories that you petted a tiger once in your career. So things like that are really cool and attractive, and that's why we choose this profession. So it's not, it's probably not a surprise. I don't know where you are, but in North America, especially in Canada, we have lots of porcupine cases. That's on the left. That's that dog with all the coils in her face. We actually were anticipating maybe developing a breed of porcupines that don't hibernate in the winter, so we can consistently have patients throughout the year, because in the winter you usually don't get porcupines. That's a bunch of syringes with blood from a rat poison toxicity. There was a chest effusion. Julien, wanted to add something? No. Okay, I thought you wanted to add something. And then we transfused the dog. So that was foreign bodies. That was my favorite surgical hat that I used to wear during the surgery. One day I made a mistake of walking into euthanasia appointment wearing this. The owner thought it was a little too graphic, so that was kind of silly. But lots of cool stuff that we see as as veterinarians, and there's lots of reasons to love our profession for. But also it comes with that was a case of tamponade, so pericardial effusion. Those are the most rewarding on emergency, because they come in collapse and the dog is dying in front of you. Then you tap them and they get up in front of you immediately. I think that's the most rewarding condition, if it's not a hard base tumor, which usually it is. But they do rise in front of you, and that's a miracle to the owner. So that's what gets me excited. And I've been back to it actually after 8 years not working as a vet. I've been doing some shifts last 3-4 months, and it is exciting. But what we don't know, and what we're not told, is that it comes with an exhaustion. It comes with a sleep deprivation, especially if you're a ER vet. And when you're young, you think you can do it. I had multiple nights sleeping in the kennels, as you can see, and just trying to catch up, for 2-3 hours between the shifts, and then driving home for 3 hours after a 12-hour shift, and 3 more hours typing the records. And as technology can help you, that's one of the things that you can do these days, is type less. But many things that frustrate you with a workflow, with management and other things. And eventually you do start getting into things like, on the right picture there, that's my car that I rolled off the highway driving from the night shift, and nearly killed myself. And then so it all accumulates, and we don't know what it results in. But essentially, in my story, I did end up committing suicide through a very deep depression, and not really understanding I didn't know how to do anything else. I wanted to be a vet, and then when I realized that I don't want to be a vet anymore, I didn't know what I can do with my life. So I was resuscitated. I'm pretty open about the story these days, is because to identify and qualify. So it's not just I learned about burnout, I actually been through it. And at least I hope it makes someone comfortable to reach out. I'm always open to talk to someone about it, and share my experience and what was done. But that made me passionate about the topic. And probably like I burned out in 2009. So about 6 or 7 years later, when I was going through my MBA, I got to choose the topic for dissertation. And I decided to look outside of vet industry and see if burnout is something that's happening in other industries. And the closest to us is medicine. So I wanted to see if they somehow handle it better and prepare people for just to be in the profession. So they're a little less stressed out, and just to find out what actually is happening to us, because everybody thinks that it's you're working too much. That's the most common thing when people say burnout. It's almost equal to you working too much. And I have examples actually in this presentation. I have an example talking about how burnout can be not because you work too much, because other reasons. So I dedicated my career about 6 years ago to learning about this. And several educations I took are all geared towards researching the burnout and essentially trying to find the management solution to burnout, not necessarily the personal well-being, which is very important. The sleep hygiene, meditation, yoga, psychologists, like all of those things that are very important, but they're on the personal level. And our industry is trying to tell us that you should take care of yourself, but they're not taking responsibility that actually it's in the organizational behavior and management and leadership, what we are lacking, and we could do much better. So my focus is not how to do something yourself, but how to manage people and lead people with a difference so it doesn't cause the burnout. So we've done a bunch of research. So that first one on the left, lean thinking in the veterinary organizations to improve employee experience. That was the dissertation. And I didn't want to just park it on, somewhere, and it's a article that you wrote and nobody ever read it. So I decided to continue with it. And at Galaxy, which is actually, Julien mentioned that it's an organization that our purpose is to decrease the burnout in veterinary domain. We decided to do it every year. So we do a cross-sectional study on in the industry. We survey about 2,000 people every year, and then we measure the burnout, but we also put certain hypotheses next to it and say, okay, well, we measured the burnout, and the very first year I just wanted to know if the industry is truly burned out, because everybody's talking about it. When someone commits suicide, it's a tragedy. Everybody's talking about it, but I was confused. Is it just a one-off, and is it just very sad story? It's almost like a shark attack. When you hear one, everybody talks about it and it's in the newspaper, or our industry is actually going through significant burnout. So that's why I did the study, and sure enough, we're burnout. So the industry is really burned out. Julien mentioned Mary's experience through COVID. COVID was even worse. So we actually did just coincidentally before, during COVID, and now after. And then COVID was definitely a huge hit on our industry. We found out that technicians are more burned out than veterinarians, even though everybody talks about poor vets. I don't try to minimize it, but we're not paying enough attention to technicians, I think, or nurses, depending where you are in the world. And this year, past year, 2022, the most burnout actually hospital managers. And we compared the CSRs, the veterinarians, technicians, and hospital managers. And hospital managers seem to be under more pressure than anybody else. So those kind of things that we measure, we slice the statistics on finding out why they're burned out, and then we throw in hypothesis. So last year, we wanted to know, will compensation influence the burnout? So, and compensation based on commission or pro-sell or production, whatever you call it, versus salary. So we did that. We also compared whether euthanasia versus economic euthanasia influences the degree of burnout. So all of those cool things you can find, those are the white papers that we published. We're going to do it every year, hopefully continue so. And so we wrote a bunch of material on it. But so that became my passion, and that's how we're contributing to the industry.
How many years of data do you have, Ivan?
So we've done 3. So every year we did it for the last 3 years. This year is going to be 4.
Okay. You have data pre-COVID or not? Or you started in 19 or 2020? Oh, it's frozen. Well, while Ivan is a bit frozen, I'm going to ask Mary what's during COVID, but Ivan, are you back? Mary, maybe you can share, your experience during COVID and what was your experience during that time?
Yeah, I mean, by the time COVID started, so in early 2020, right? I had been a manager for quite a few years at that point and had been a technician a lot longer than that. So starting out in equine med, working emergency medicine, moving to general practice. And it definitely, from a management perspective, hit like a ton of bricks, right? Because there were so many changes that had to happen literally overnight. You went from functioning as a normal animal hospital one day, the next day your doors are shut, everybody has to be in masks, we're temping employees at the door before they can come in, we're trying to figure out if we can do, you know, group rotational shifts where the same groups always work together so it doesn't take out the entire hospital if somebody gets sick, curbside protocols, all that kind of stuff. So you went from, you know, just kind of still scraping by day to day and dealing with angry clients, dealing with, you know, unhappy employees a lot of the time, just because, you know, you get tired, everybody gets tired in this industry after a while, you know, to now the stress is tenfold for everyone. And as the manager, you're having to not only come up with all these new protocols, but also deal with your team's stress and anxiety around this illness, especially with kids, families, everything like that. So definitely saw burnout amplified a million times just at the beginning of COVID.
Okay. So Ivan, my question, when you dropped, you had data pre-COVID or not? Or you started doing COVID?
No, the first study I just remembered, it was actually during COVID because we collected the data, and it was but it was the worst. Yeah, it was the worst because now we know that we're coming out of it. We actually, as an industry, a little less burned out than during COVID, but we're still really burned out. So it's not like much better, but COVID definitely had a huge impact. And as Mary shares the experience, I mean, everybody understands that, but you know, it's difficult because vets are not very easy to change, and the vet clinics are not easy to change, and then all of a sudden you have to change everything, and it's a stressful enough industry. So yeah,
okay.
So kudos to Mary being a manager at that time.
Okay.
All right, so let's talk about burnout and what actually happens. So everybody, when I mentioned that already, and when everybody is talking about burnout, it's like, oh, you're working too much, and it's not necessarily just that. So there was the first person who described burnout in the organizational behavior sense was Christina Maslach. She did it at the end of '80s, and she actually described 6 triggers of burnout. And we're going to talk about it in this framework because that's how we are actually approaching it. But essentially, there's 6 triggers, which are on the left side here, and it's workload. So everybody talks about that. But then whether you have control over what you do, the reward, we'll talk about each individual one, the community breakdown, fairness, unfairness in the organization, and values misalignment, which essentially leads to exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficacy. And you're just disconnected, and you just like go blah. I don't care. I remember distinctly this manager. I was sitting after the night shift. I was 4 hours into writing records after the night shift, and my manager comes in and she's giving me this feedback on some sort of case. And it's like, I've been in the building for like 16 hours. And she's like, well, I'm sure you care. And I turned to her and I said, no, I don't. And I didn't. It was a very honest answer, but she was shocked that I don't care. And I was like, no, I don't, because I'm just like, I'm empty inside. So, but that leads usually to things like poor job satisfaction, incivility, absenteeism. So people are missing a lot of the time, take off all of their sick days. They make medical errors, which is more dangerous, and in medical records and in general. And they lose passion over the profession, and they have an intention to leave. And it's important to delineate between the 2 terms. A lot of people confuse them. So there's compassion fatigue and there's burnout. And it's maybe we're splitting the hair here, but the difference is actually how it expresses itself. When you have compassion fatigue, it's also related to medical professionals, but it's something that is very similar to burnout, but it can go away. You take a vacation, you take a weekend, and then you kind of restore yourself, you feel better. Burnout doesn't go away. And that's the problem, because you think that you're going to leave this hospital, work somewhere else, and then you move to another hospital and you're not happier. And at that point, when I burned out, I was started locuming, I started doing other clinics, I stopped doing ER, and nothing really could make me happier. It was just deep sort of depression. So let's unpack these. So these are the classic 6 triggers that Christina Maslach described. So lack of control, insufficient reward, and it doesn't have to be monetary. We'll talk about it. Work overload, community breakdown, unfairness, and conflict of values. So let's talk a little bit about lack of control. So when we're talking about control is when you don't feel like you can influence what you do. And essentially, you don't feel like you're autonomous in your work environment. So very much happens in the environments where it's top-down management, where you're always told what to do. Recently, I experienced it in the place where I was doing some shifts. Total top-down, sent through the email, passive-aggressive sort of management rather than leadership. When you can't delegate skills, you're always like, oh, I'm just going to do it myself because I'll do it better. You don't have that sort of, delegation of tasks. Scheduling can drive a lot of that if it's inefficient. And then you feel like you're slave to, someone else's decision, how you're scheduling, instead of letting people to sort this out. People are adults and they can actually manage the schedule themselves between them. Poor work-life balance comes with the sleep deprivation and things like that. Economic euthanasia. One of the findings that we had last year in our study was that euthanasia itself, which I actually was surprised, but that's why we do these studies, because we throw a hypothesis and we see. So we measure the burnout, and then we ask same people questions about economic euthanasia and about regular euthanasia. And those people that are more burned out, it was not parallel with euthanasia itself, and euthanasia doesn't seem to affect veterinarians unless it's specifically economic. So when people cannot pay for the services and they end up euthanizing despite the fact that they can help the animal, like a block cat, for example, if you euthanize because they have absolutely no money, and then you end up euthanizing a cat that actually you know that you could help. Another thing that is really big trigger for part of burnout is non-competes. So again, just experience in a hospital where we worked, the managers would not allow people to work even in other businesses, not even related to business. So they had technicians that couldn't make enough money, and then they wanted to work in a retail store, and management would not allow them to do that. That leads to significant burnout. I didn't understand that. But essentially, these are the things. So lack of control, if you're not providing this leadership and management more autonomy to people, then that's one of those 6 triggers. But there's also technology that can kind of free you up. And Mary will talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Zach, I saw all of this stuff in clinic. I absolutely see the impact of not having autonomy as being huge, because when we look at broadly, like, why people don't want to continue working different places in any industry, it's a lack of growth. It's a lack of solid management. It's a lack of having the ability to invest in passion in their work. So those pieces are things that we can really work on from a management perspective in clinics. From an efficiency perspective, having tools that can take over repetitive admin tasks so that our teams aren't stuck on the phone scheduling appointments 20, 30, 40 times a day. They're not stuck on the phones confirming appointments. They're not trying to manually send out reminders to clients to get them back in the business. Being able to just remove those phone calls means you're not leaving somebody on hold who has an emergency and really needs to talk to one of the medical staff. And being able to add diversity to the doctor's schedules, right? So being able to let clients book only a certain number of wellness in the morning, or a certain number of, sick pet in the morning, and then a different combination in the afternoon. It can get tiresome to have the same exact day every day in and out with no change in your schedule. And being able to automate that process and take it out of your staff's hands means they can focus on what they really want to do, which is help animals.
Just unmuting myself. Yes, thank you. And one of the triggers that is not described by Christina Maslach, but another psychologist, was actually redundancy of tasks. And we did experiment in our surveys, in the annual surveys, trying to find out if people are getting tired of the same things over and over and over. And essentially graduating from the vet school when you're going 100 miles an hour trying to become a vet, and then going to complete halt and just vaccinating all day without change, that can actually be a toll. So it's actually called burnout through underutilization of your skills and redundancy of tasks. So when you don't provide the variety of what you do, that's an important piece as well.
Absolutely. Yep. And we see that with technicians too, right? Doctors don't utilize their
Yeah.
technicians to their fullest extent. And so the average lifespan of a technician in the US in practice is about 6.5 years. That's
Yeah.
not long enough for someone who brings that much value to a practice. So for sure, getting those repetitive admin tasks off of their plate, getting follow-up calls, things like that automated so that they can focus on patients in the practice, huge.
Yep. So now moving on insufficient reward. When we say that, everybody thinks not paid enough. And it's not only about pay. So what's important is an inadequate compensation is important. And I always talk about compensation as sort of an of course. I don't, a lot of people, I just, again, sort of recent experience, the management was trying to retain people in light of absolute lack of leadership with compensation. So just trying to pepper people with a couple more bucks to stay, rather than providing proper leadership and basically creating a community in the workplace, just kind of throwing money. And money works for about 3 weeks. If you increase someone's pay, maybe 2 months after that, that just becomes new lifestyle, and you're not going to be happy with just money. But money is sort of, I call it an of course, in the Maslow's sort of hierarchy. It's on the bottom. It's like shelter and safety, and money is the same thing. But then lack of growth opportunities. So if you're not providing your staff with the opportunity to grow, intellectual employees are thriving in the environment where they can increase the mastery of what they do. So essentially continuous education, not just go to a conference and get drunk with your buddies from vet school, but actually structurally, that's good too. Like, you should do that. But actually getting into a structural growth opportunities, especially with the technicians. I mean, we don't have technicians practicing at the top of their license. The worst thing I ever heard managers say to a technician, while you're leaning, you could be cleaning. Like, that is actually a thing that came out of someone's mouth. I heard that. That's just disgusts me. I'm sorry. So technicians are professionals that should be doing their professional duties. And if you can't keep them occupied enough, then you don't have a busy enough practice. Work on marketing. That's just my opinion. So then underutilization, same thing. So you're not utilizing people to their full potential. Lack of appreciation. I always say to people, thank you is free. More thank you doesn't hurt anybody, doesn't cost anything. But so we at Galaxy, we have a channel. So we use Slack for all the communications, and there's other platforms. It's important to have sort of a internal communication. We have just a channel that's called shout outs, and then people deliberately always specifically do shout outs to each other. Thanks, Amanda, for throwing that catheter into a kitten. Shout out to, Patrick for holding that nasty cat. But it's just a constant appreciation and appraisal of people, and it goes a long way and helps people to stay as a community. And then lack of meaningful goals. Goal setting is a big aspect of well-being. If you read any book on positive psychology, having goals in life is very important. And one of the hypotheses that we proven last year, it was my idea that vets burn out also because they lose the goal after they graduate. If you think about it, we surveyed new grads immediately after graduation, absolutely no burnout, even though they went through one of the hardest schools on the planet. They're not burned out. They're excited about becoming a vet, and then 9 to 12 months into it, they're all burned out. That's the radical change that happens. And I had this idea that maybe it happens because you're running 100 miles an hour, you're graduating, you're ready to go to this world, but you were on the trajectory that is set by the veterinary education. You know what to do from the 10 years old when you decided to be a vet, what you need to do to become a vet. You need to have good grades in school. You need to go to college. You need to go to vet college. All of that is lined up, the path and the goal setting. Veterinarians are very goal-oriented people. That's a 15 to 20-year goal that you target and you hit. And then after that, you graduate and there's no goal. You're just a vet. That's it. You're done.
Can you share some example of goals applicable to?
Sure. So for example, it could be personal, it could be career. In positive psychology, they recommend finding the goal that is beyond your ego. So it's not just your personal. So for example, there's actually a big exercise where you cluster sort of interest in your life, and then you decide what do you want to achieve. One easy exercise, and I hate that when people ask that in the interview, where do you see yourself in 5 years? When someone asks that, I want to say not here. But but the point is, how do you see it? Because everybody has dreams. what do you see? Okay, I graduated. I want to have, I want to be married. I want to have 2 kids, and I want to have a dog and live on the beach. Like, that's my dream. Okay, that's the goal. So you set that goal, and then everything in your life, what you do is starting to kind of assemble towards that. But what you need to do then is to backtrack from 5 or 10-year goal into 5, 3, and then you go back to 1. It's almost like strategic planning. You face that in traction, but it's a personal strategic planning. And then what do I need to do this quarter to get there? So for example, to have that lifestyle, I want to be making $400,000 a year. Okay, how do I get there? What do I need to do to get there? And what the organizations can do, they can help structure the goals. So goals could be professional. I want to learn how to do ultrasound. I graduated, I wanted to be a radiologist, but I didn't have it in me for 4 more years to do the residency. But you can set micro credentials and micro goals. Essentially, I want to learn in the first year how to do ultrasound. Okay, well, to go and do 1 wet lab at the critical care conference, that's not enough. Let's chunk the year. You sit down with your mentor in the clinic and say, you want to learn ultrasound in this year, let's invest into you. So as a clinic, we'll invest into this because you will be providing extra services. And then the first quarter, you will learn the abdominal ultrasound. The second quarter, you'll learn echo. The third quarter, you'll learn something specific to, finding and aspirating the tumor. So you actually set goals professionally because we were given the goals by educational facility where we went to school. And we just don't think that way. We're like, okay, I'm just floating now and I don't have the goals.
Yeah.
So does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean,
yeah. So having that structure to it is very important, because what happens in positive psychology is when you have the goal, that everything in your life starts to assemble actually towards that goal, because you're paying more attention to the things that contribute to your North Star. And it actually works out. They call it also as sort of a red car syndrome. When you buy a red car, you just, you wanted to buy an, I don't know, Audi. And then that's the car you want. Then all of a sudden you bought an Audi. Everybody's driving Audi. Everywhere where you look around, it's the same car that you bought and you never noticed it before, because that's how your mind works. That's actually, it recognizes things that you're focusing on. So that long-term goal actually will help you to get to that point. All right.
okay.
So let's move to the next one. So work overload. This is, everybody's talking about it. So it's pretty straightforward. I think there's more that technology can do in this, but I'll run through things that are related. You might have not thought about the work overload. So insufficient workflows, we've sorted a lot of that stuff through SmartFlow experience, and just optimizing the stupid things. We do so many stupid things. In the SmartFlow days, we would arrive to the hospital and then we walk through and I would just say, can you tell me what is annoying along the hospital, along the workflow? And essentially people will walk you through the hospital and say, okay, well, this step is stupid. We hate printing out this piece of paper. And then we have to shred it right after that. And then I would say, okay, well, let's just start doing things that are not what you call stupid. And then essentially that was the solution to it. And then everybody thought that we're geniuses because we know the workflow so well. But I was like, you just named them. So remove those stupid steps. Or one of the colleagues named them. I really like the name. They call it pebbles in your shoes. When you have a little pebble in your shoe and it's so annoying, those are the things at work that you should allow people to eliminate. And don't do it yourself. Don't make a huge meeting. Just ask people and say, what is the most annoying in this particular workflow when you check in the patient? People that do it, they know it. They know what needs to be corrected, and they call these things stupid because they hate them. So let people sort out the inefficiencies in their workflow. That's what's important. Compensation based on production, it does increase work overload. There are positive things in production. That was actually something I thought was not a good idea, but it actually, from the burnout perspective, it's not too bad to be on production. But when you're on production, you can drive yourself into work overload because you want to make more money. So you need to be careful with that. Lack of professional training and mentorship can increase the work overload. Misalignments between departments, very common in large facilities. So essentially people are just yanking the cases back and forth. I was always the night guy, and the internal medicine comes in the morning and says, oh, okay, well, you used all the money of the client. We can't do the MRI with them. So this whole interdepartmental argument. And then poor work-life balance again here. But Mary, I think you wanted to add something here on how to optimize workload with technology.
Yeah, specifically a couple products that we have that can help with that. One being Vetstoria, right? So not, again, as we talked about earlier, not having those repetitive phone calls for booking in appointments, not having to constantly worry about where things can go on your schedule because You tell Vetstoria where it wants to go and it goes there. And then also having pet desk in place, being able to have an app or a place where clients can go and self-serve with their own records, get reminders, and communicate with the veterinarian is really helpful in removing those repetitive admin tasks and being able to put Vetstoria within pet desk, Vetstoria on your website. All these pieces really help take that day-to-day monotony off of the table when it comes to client communication specifically.
Thank you for that. Community breakdown. This is an interesting one. When you don't have a community around your employees, when you treat the place like we're paying people to come in and then essentially to earn money and leave, this is where you will break down the hospital. When people don't have sense of belonging. So if you don't create community around your staff, it dies out very quickly. Again, so just recently, amazing team got together, startup hospital, really, really cool. I'm in a lunchroom and I apologize, but we're opening a hospital. So we actually opened a hospital an hour ago. So it's a little chaotic here. So I apologize in advance, but that's the reality of things. So sense of belonging is very important. Then lack of feedback and conflict resolution training. The veterinary medicine turns out to be the lowest EQ, probably the highest IQ, but the lowest EQ. We just don't have emotional intelligence. And it's probably one of those things like, I'm going to refer to breeding. You know how we want to breed bulldogs for big head, there's stents like this, but we end up with the respiratory, syndromes of the brachycephalic breed. I think this is how we select the veterinarians. Brilliant people, type A personalities, can't talk to each other. So essentially, somehow we kind of pick these people that are just can't get along with each other. And then the difficult part is that, but it's fixable. So you can train the entire team on feedback provision, how they talk to each other, how to resolve the conflicts. All of that training is basically could be a curriculum when you onboard people. And that's what we don't have.
What are the reasons for this?
For not having this?
Well, for the lack of communication skills.
I don't know, man. Like, I think that that's kind of how the vets are selected. Like, I don't know. I think it's like a parallel path. You select a group of type A personalities. A lot of people say I went into vet medicine because I hate, dealing with people, not knowing that that's actually dealing with people business. It's not really dealing with pets. And I think that that's one of those things. You kind of get a little bit of a sociopathic people that, that just can't really communicate well with each other. But there's training. Like, you can actually train people in feedback provision. Being honest and compassionate when you're providing feedback is very important, and a lot of people just don't know how to do it, but you can train people. So in Galaxy, for example, when we onboard a new hospital or start a new hospital, there's a curriculum. We train people how to provide feedback, and it's very important for the staff and the management being open to it. Because if we're doing stupid things in the hospital, I love people coming to me and say, Ivan, that is stupid what you came up with. But I'm open to that. That's how everybody should be open to feedback. If you're afraid and you can't tell anybody, then people will continue doing stupid things, hating them without being able to tell you. And that's how you evolve. Sure. Unclear organizational structure, when you have just chaotic sort of, managing, without having the org chart as much as that corporate or accountability chart, when you have 3 bosses, and then the manager told you something to do, then then manager assistant, then the owner, and then this is co-owner by minority shareholder, and you have no idea who is one boss that you have. That's very important. That can lead to breakdown of the sort of that particular trigger. And no alignment. And alignment is very simple. You need to have, again, I'm going to sound corporate, but if you have core values of the organization that are well defined, you have alignment around the structure. How do you resolve conflict? If we have one of our core values is the quality of care, and then we're not presenting the quality of care in our treatment of patients, then that's very simple. You can then bring everything to the same core value and discuss it. But it's very, very rare that hospitals truly define core values And if they do, a lot of the times it's the vet that says, all right, our core values is,
Yeah.
being awesome and this and that. There's a really cool methodology that Julien mastered recently. It's called Traction. And it helps you to actually create core values. Very much recommended. The book is by Gino Wickman. And then you can actually, it's like a manual. You just follow it and you implement it.
Yeah. Little story on this. It was actually during COVID. I think at that stage, Vetstoria was reaching 40 people. And I called Ivan and just say, "Ooh, it's becoming a little bit challenging here to make sure everybody is aligned and understand what the goals are, what they have to do, and everybody, heading towards the same direction." And Ivan said, "Ooh, you need to do something right now." And the right now doing something was implementing Traction. So I had a few sessions with Ivan. Well, first I read the book. And then a few sessions with Ivan helping me understanding and putting in place a process that will help implementing Traction within Vetstoria. And that has helped us to grow significantly. And Ivan, I can't imagine when I have every week a one-to-one session with 3 employees, and it's pretty casual. And I think 50% of the team members says, "I love working here, it's great because we know what we have to do." And how do you know that? And also always the same response. The rocks and the scorecards and all these things help everybody, heading toward the same direction. So thanks for the tip and the recommendation.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I'm really glad to hear that. When you reach sort of 30 to 40 people in the organization, if you don't have a framework, it doesn't have to be Traction, it's just the one that I stumbled upon.
Yeah.
But if you don't have a framework of how to organize your business, which Traction is one, then it's really, really difficult. So for anybody who doesn't have structure, accountability chart, organize meeting cadences, goals set up, it's all in one book, very simple. It's written by someone to do that, and it's a manual. You just follow page by page. You can have an implementer, and it does magic. I've done it with every business I'm involved as an investor or leader or anywhere. IDEX, we implemented Traction everywhere.
And honestly, we mentioned 40 people, but you can do it with 10. Okay.
Yeah. I started in every organization when we're 2. We start with the level 10 meetings and then we grow. Yeah. No. And transparency. If you don't have everything above board, I have my favorite saying, and one of the core values at Galaxy is integrity, and everybody has different sort of, different explanation to what that is. But I always say, I think it's Mark Twain that said, the man who says the truth doesn't have to remember what he said. If you're always honest, and if you always do things just like if nobody was looking, or, then it's very, very important. So transparency and integrity is very important in an organization. Let's move to unfairness. So lack of open communication, unfairness in organization. The most common thing that you can see, if people of the same rank, if you will, or the same sort of hierarchy on the org chart are paid differently, and it's not explained in any way other than Nancy worked for Dr. Ivan for 20 years, therefore she's paid that much, but might be less qualified than the next coming person who was just hired. So transparency in the pay grade and how it's all attributed, and then the clarity of how you move up or down the sort of the organizational ladder is extremely important. And then the unfairness sets really, really well into organizational culture, and it's really hard to remove. If there's favoritism, it's really, really difficult to remove. So make sure that you treat people equally, that everybody's treated equally despite of any relationship, and that will go along the way. So how the decisions are made, again, a recent experience that I had. So essentially the policies are just pushed on people, and it's just, this is how we do it now, despite the fact that people that came up with that solution have no idea how is it done right now, or will never do the actual act. So when management is pushing things on the team and says, hey, you should be doing this way, and it's like, well, we're doing this, so you have no idea. You don't know how we check in the patient, and you're just sitting In an office, you never even went up front to actually see it. So back to traction, there's a framework in the weekly meetings, how you resolve the issues. Issues are accumulated throughout the week, then they're brought up to a common meeting, and then everybody who is participating in the solution then owns a piece of it. Once people own the solution, they will actually follow it. Therefore, the change management is much easier. If I'll ask someone and say, hey, how would you like to solve this problem? If you tell me how you would like to solve it and we brainstorm, you're not going to argue with me that this is how we deal with it because you came up with this solution. But when you're coming and say, hey, this is how you do this now, I'm going to retaliate and I'm going to push back as much as I can because I'm not going to be told how I'm doing things. So that's very, very important. DVMs on production create a lot of unfairness. So even though for DVMs, it might be a good thing, but then with a money-motivated veterinarian is doing a really good production, management is patting on the back, says, you're doing great. The rest of the team is dragged behind to see 30 cases a day, and they're not getting compensated. They're still paid the same $20 an hour, and they're not getting the benefit of this. So a fair bonus structure that supports production of the veterinarians is very important because you will burn out your staff, which is equally or more important. I always feel they're more important than me. And that's very important. I know we're getting close to an hour. Let me just quickly talk about this one, and then we'll wrap up from there. So conflict of values. So when you're performing economic euthanasia is essentially it's a conflict of values. I know I can treat this pet, but I have to kill it. And then this is what conflicting in the veterinarian's mind. And it's really difficult. And with the time it accumulates. Lack of opportunities for professional growth. And then the standards of care in the organization, very important. And definitely if core values are not defined, that's the thing. So very commonly happens with the acquisition by private equity backed corporate. When the clinic is bought, it's had certain core values, even if they're not defined, and then corporate buys the clinic and says, this is our 6 core values, you all have to be adhered to them. It's like, no, I have to be adhered to the dude that hired me. I was hired by Dr. Julien, and I want to follow him. I don't want to follow the corporate. And that's where the conflict of values sets in. Very quickly, we'll give you an example and probably wrap up with that. So this is the hospital that I was talking about. Recently, I was involved in it. A very unique case. So people were not overloaded with work because it's a new facility, not enough patients. And they were paid really well. So when you think about the burnout, everybody says, oh, you're working too much. People are sitting on their phones. 6 techs and assistants sit on their phones because there's no clients. So no work overload, paid really well. But they were redundant processes, inefficient. There was no defined values and poor standards of medical treatment, huge favoritism and intransparency to salaries, and top-down management without feedback loop. And everybody's burned out. And now people are jumping the ship, essentially in the last 2 weeks. So that's an example. What I will do, I'll just wrap up with this slide. If you guys have your phone nearby, and I don't know if you guys are providing, Julien, I don't know if you're providing the slides to the audience, but if you want to scan this QR code, if you're in management in the clinic, this is a survey that we created that you can run through the questions and self-assess whether your team potentially burned out or not. And then it kind of asks the questions, not direct about these triggers, but it has on the background assumption to these triggers, and it will give you a temperature gauge, and it will tell you how well you're managing or leading your hospital or how poorly, and then you need to address this. So please utilize that, and I'll leave it on here so we can have a little bit of a discussion. If there are Q&A, I see there's chat.
Yeah, there's one question. Can we please speak about how clinic leaders and colleagues play a role in supporting team members dealing with burnout?
So maybe a question, leaders and colleagues play a role in supporting team members dealing with burnout. So if you're talking about currently those that already have burnout, I think that's a completely different issue. So what I'm presenting here is essentially something that you need to work against these triggers. And then there's 6 of them, put everything in practice so you don't have those in your organization. But if you have people that are already burned out, that's a clinical situation. That is, I'm not a psychologist and I would be afraid to actually recommend something, but there's an organization and the free app called Vets in Mind. It's available for free. It was started by Mark Johnson in UK. I'm on the board. And we created a questionnaire and couple surveys in there where you can self-identify whether you have a burnout, anxiety, or compassion fatigue. So you can actually self-diagnose, and there's a bunch of resources where you can go and look for help. But if you think if your employee is experiencing burnout, it's not take a vacation, it's an emergency, and we do lose people to it. So be very, very careful. Don't try to play a psychologist or psychiatrist. When people are in the state of burnout, it can lead to suicide. I'm not trying to be too morbid about it, but it's dangerous. All right.
Yeah. We all have lost friends through this, unfortunately, in this industry. Next question. Receptionists tend to juggle multiple tasks and are the first point of contact for clients. How can we recognize signs of burnout in ourselves and our colleagues early on? And what step can we take to address it proactively?
So it kind of goes back to that sort of app. So that's in mind. Please download it and provide it, and just send it to your entire staff and be like, hey, heard about this really cool app. You can self-diagnose. And then if anybody ever experiences burnout, provide this to them. I've done it recently in another hospital where I was involved, and I just sent it blanket to all the employees. And I said, hey, if anybody wants to see it, and I don't know if it worked or not, but I think it's at least the starting point, because it's hard to look for a solution if you don't know the problem. So defining the problem is more important. And then once you define the problem, you know, okay, I'm in a state of burnout, then you probably will seek a solution. And that was my problem. I didn't know what burnout is. I just hated life. And that's what it was. And then years later, I realized that this is sort of a pandemic in our profession, and then this needs to be addressed. But another thing is that if you have people that are disconnected, that absent a lot, that don't really care, well, they could be people that just don't want to work for you. But if you've seen a person who had a very high ethics and moral standards, and then all of a sudden they're disconnected, instead of correcting the person, find out what's going on in their life. Find out why they're not the same way. Because a lot of the time, before you get to penalizing the person, there's a broken process, there's inefficiency or a lack of training that you provided to the process that you have, and only then it's the person. And then if something radically changed with the person, people rarely become all of a sudden lazy. People have something happening with them, and if you see it with someone, pay very close attention, because it's not necessarily that this is a person who just all of a sudden became, you know, lazy. There's something happening in their life, and it's better to sit down and have a private conversation.
That makes sense. Ivan, thanks a lot for sharing the QR code. Oh,
someone said that QR code didn't work. I apologize. I don't know if we can, Vets in Mind, thank you for that. So QR code disabled. I don't know if, Julien, if we could send I'll
send the presentation.
I'll send you the link if you can follow up with the people that were here, if you have them registered, and then we'll send it's a really cool survey. We worked on it for a long time, and I will make sure I'll follow up with you, Julien. So
okay, that's great. Okay, Mary, anything to add?
I think Dr. Zach covered it really well. I think the combination of really educating yourself on how to manage your team and how to understand your team's needs and implement the tools that they need to make their day-to-day more efficient are huge pieces in fighting burnout in your own clinic. Yeah,
I agree. If you want to have more information on what Vetstoria and Petvisor do, you can just visit the website, petvisor.com and vetstoria.com. Ivan, thanks again for sharing this very valuable piece of information, and we'll send you Ivan's presentation within the next couple of days. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.